there it is. Good. Good morning. Well, thank you for inviting me to your conference. It was the first time I attended. I was quite impressed with your partying skills of yesterday evening.
Trained 20 years.
It looks like really experienced participants. So dear members of IFED, dear participants of the ENTER2016, I thank you for your unwavering commitment to tourism and for organizing this conference. So thank you very much. And I think for UNWTO, joining this conference and giving us the opportunity to explain a bit what we are doing and what our viewpoint is on how to get data, how to get statistics, is actually quite important. What I would like to say some words on behalf of my Secretary General who couldn't attend this event. I always say Mr. Taleb Rifai, he's probably one of the biggest contributors to tourism statistics because he's traveling all over the world so many times. He has so many commitments. He meets so many governments, other stakeholders, private stakeholders. So if I count only him in my statistics, he's probably one of the outliers, but he contributes immensely to what is tourism. So let me see whether here. Have to take it over there. Otherwise, I can put it here. Okay, good. Yes. So, on some words on his behalf, and then I will talk a bit about more about my program, a bit more on detailed statistics, data, how to get data, what we are doing. International tourism continues to grow, as you see on this slide. It's a very simple slide, but our forecasts say, well, we will end up somewhere in 1.8 billion, maybe in 2030. It could be higher, it could be a bit lower, but it's definitely on a constant growth path. And for 2015, international tourist arrival grew about 4.4%, reaching 2.2 million, more or less. That means 50 million more tourists traveled and crossed international borders each year. So that is despite of all the geopolitical tensions we see, despite the economic tensions, despite the difficulties and the concerns about safety and security. And that is, despite all these odds against tourism, the fifth consecutive year that we have constant growth, and usually growth which is much bigger than the average GDP growth. So it's a track record, I would say. The 1.8 billion which we might achieve in 2013, and that's a very positive news, I would say, for the sector. Increasingly, it contributes to job creation, promoting investment, trade, infrastructure development, new opportunities, social inclusion. This is particularly true in Europe, where we see that tourism has an instrumental role into playing into the economic recovery and generation of jobs. Today, consumers are the center point of all tourism activity and development. And what we see is what we sometimes call the fourth revolution. So consumers can have access to information which was 20 years ago unthinkable. So screens are everywhere, connecting billions of people across the planet in real time, empowering them to provide voice to silent and creating a new sense of belonging. There's little doubt that the new technologies, and that is one of your themes, give new opportunities in new time. And it's really also a power shift from governments to citizens. That's what we clearly see, from companies to consumers. In this context, allow me to share you three areas where we see technology impacting on the sector. First, there are new emerging business models, as you have discussed here. And looking at the program and the themes, that was clear. Peer-to-peer, call it platform sharing economy. The wordings is even difficult because the development is so fast. So what do you really mean by sharing economy? Is it really sharing? Is it participating? You still pay in it? So is sharing the right terminology? But we all see that there are huge benefits in all of this. So today's destinations and companies can reach directly to consumers through a range of digital platforms. Conversely, consumers have access to more information, more choice, and more opportunities to voice their opinion. And that can be sort of whistleblower for unethical practices in various areas, but it can also highlight the good practices, so giving positive feedback. And in this context, branding is an ever more complex challenge requiring destinations and companies to adjust their structures, their policies and strategies to remain competitive. The second area which we think as organization impacting tourism is what we called a higher degree of accountability. As I say, today consumers have much more information than in the past, and they can play the whistleblower for unethical practices. But on the positive side, they can also be the biggest ambassador for your brand, which you established. The third is what we call the shared responsibility. So tourism comes with an increased responsibility. So if you look at the steep increase, which also means, well, tourism will use more resources. Tourism will have an impact on the environment, on the social structure in destination, in countries. So that is where the responsibility of a tourist, of a visitor, of a traveler comes towards the planet and towards people. So connecting is also making travelers more aware of their responsibilities. And I think technology makes a huge impact on that. It can preserve our common values and our culture and making others aware of that. Dear participants, every day when we watch the news, we think the world is falling apart. We see terrorism, we see extremism, intolerance, armed conflicts, natural disasters, you name it, health pandemic, the latest news on that. But despite of these, say, voices of darkness, we want to put thousands of years of globalizations actually to play for us. So I think we should also look at the positive sides of global achievements, but also the global problems. And I think tourism is a good example for that. It creates much more understanding of people. That works, yeah. So after these short introductory remarks about our current political stance and the way the World Tourism Organization as an international agency would like to steer some developments into a certain direction where we think that is what we and as tourism sector should do, I will be a bit more specific, show you a quick overview on WTO, but then merge into what is statistics and what is measurement. So for those who are not too familiar with the World Tourism Organization, we are what is called a specialized agency of the United Nations. The United Nations has the General Security Council, so all you know in what's happening in New York. But then there are specialized agency for various topics, let's call it. So you have food, you have population, you have health, and tourism is one of them. And our responsibility or our mandate is to promote tourism as a tool for economic growth, inclusive development, and environmental stability. So that is a bit why we are here, why we are there. Currently, we have 162 member states and more than 400 affiliate members. These are mainly big association tourism companies. So we want to have a direct contact also a bit to the industry or the consumers in that area. That is a bit peculiar. Usually, UN agency, they're working only with governments. So the interlocutors are the representatives of the government. We have also as members private businesses, if you want to, or private associations. Affiliate members are, but also academics, universities, things like that. So we promote tourism for the sake of tourism, in a way. But that's not always what we do. We also want to promote it, as I said, for economic growth, for the stability in development, for the social inclusion. what has all the statistics to do with that? And why is statistics important? I will first give you some examples where you probably don't think too much about that. And they are not necessarily related to tourism, but I will come to that. But here are some excellent examples of tourism, which I call costly statistical errors. This is a plane crash, actually, if you see that. This plane is called the Gimli glider. What happened? It had to land on a deserted runway somewhere in Canada. And it's called, on the runway called Gimli, therefore the name Gimli glider. And what happened? Both engines went out at the same time, which is statistically almost impossible, because technically failing two engines is hardly possible. So what had happened, actually? Canada converted to the metric system of measuring fuels, etc., in the beginning of the 70s. And this plane was one of the first planes in the Air Canada using actually the metric systems. But the fuel gauge was out of order. So what did the technicians had to do? They had to fill up the fuel manually and check how much they had in there. And this is what they manually did. So no problem. So what they did was looking how much fuel they had in the plane, calculating how much they needed. They thought they had enough in it. Where the error lies, they had to do the measurement from a volume into weight, because you wanted to know the weight of the fuel in the plane, but you put the volume in it. And then they got mixed up things, because switching from the metric system or from the old British units to the metric system, which means from liters to gallons, or from pounds to kilograms, and vice versa, you have to do a bit of calculation. It's not too complicated, but they mixed it up. They mixed it up simply because they didn't get the measurements right, and therefore, as you saw on the first picture, halfway from, I think it was flying from somewhere Vancouver to Montreal, the plane went out of fuel and had to land. Luckily, nobody got hurt, and the plane could even be repaired, so flying again. Another example of a very costly statistical error. This is probably the most costly statistical error, at least I'm aware of. The picture you see here is a picture of what is called the Mars orbiter, a satellite. It is worth, or I should say it was worth, $125 million. And it was meant to be the first interplanetary weather satellite for Mars. However, what happened? As it got closer to the Mars atmosphere, it touched it and was probably burned in it, and it got lost. 125 million. For what? Similar like in the plane example, the NASA team that constructed the satellite used old imperial units, whereas the constructor of the software used metric units. So they sent 125 million piece of satellite into the orbit, and it got burned. And in the report, it said the actual root cause of the error was a failed translating of English units into metric units in the ground software. So that is what can happen. And think about that. If you don't do the measurement right, you may end up with a huge cost on your side and loss of even lives sometimes. Other quick examples, you probably remember some years ago, sorry for all the Frenchmen here, but when the French railway system introduced the new trains, fancy new trains, very nice, flashy, they were being delivered, and then they realized, they don't fit into some of our railway stations. We were all laughing, so that's sorry. But it could happen anyway. Another example from Germany, similar. So we are moving a bit more into tourism, so taking trains, that's tourism, that's traveling. A major German city was literally cut off of all railway services. What happened there? Not technically. But there were people managing, trains coming in and out, and the human resources department didn't realize, actually 80% of these people are retiring in 3 months. So we are running out of human resources, skilled people who can manage these systems. So I think it was at least 4 or 5 or 6 months. Literally, this city was not connected by railway. Another example. Some years ago, there was a huge impact of one scientific paper written by 2 economists of Harvard University, Rogoff and the other name I can't remember. Rogoff and it doesn't matter, the other one. It turned out that their paper, which had a huge impact, especially in Europe, with all the austerity programs, saying if you have a debt in about 90% of your GDP, you have to reduce it, go for austerity so that you can trigger growth. It turned out that there was a flaw in this paper, and a simple one. In their Excel sheets, they had one calculation wrong, or one link was wrong. So their whole austerity recommendations, the economic policy, was based on a flaw into one of their Excel sheets. Some years later, one student found out this and published the paper, or his paper, and said, these 2 professors are wrong. And he was still a PhD student, and his supervisor said, no, this Rogoff and other paper, they are Harvard professors, they must be wrong, double-check your numbers. He double-checked the numbers, said, no, look, correct, and I spotted the error. Afterwards, the 2 Harvard professors were not seen for 6 months into public or giving any interviews because it was so embarrassing. But also, you see, policymakers base sometimes their decision on false measurements and false errors, or not false errors, on false information. Last but not least, also a nice example, the British official National Statistical Office published some data on the state of their economy and saying, we are booming, because especially in the construction area, we are constructing huge, massive new dwellings and buildings, etc., etc. It even turned out that there was an appreciation of the British pound due to this information and the press release which came out. But they had to row back very quickly and say, it is probably an error we had in that. The British economy is not booming. The construction is not booming. We are actually more or less in a stagnant state of the economy. So these are some examples of how we see that misleading information can be disastrous for your decision making. And you think maybe this has nothing to do with tourism. In tourism, we count how many tourists are arriving in a place, how much they spend there. We see regularly examples of the arrival numbers of visitors in a country, and that means tourists as overnight visitors. So staying there, booking a hotel room or any other form of accommodation. And other countries compare themselves with their visitors, which is the overnight plus the day visitors. And of course, comparing these two is comparing pears and apples. It makes comparison completely difficult, or extremely difficult, I would even say. So if you base any decisions on that, it doesn't make much sense, really. So countries are still struggling sometimes with the most basic concepts of what is an overnight visitor, how do you define it, what are the implications, what are day visitors. Just some words about our mandate, or the mandate of my program when it comes to collecting and setting up tourism statistics. So it is really explicitly said the United Nations World Tourism Organization is the appropriate organization to collect, to analyze, to publish, and to standardize and to improve tourism statistics. So this is what we want to do. We want to have a conversation with experts, with businesses, with academics. Well, what should be measured, how it should be measured, what are the definitions, where are the inconsistencies, and that's what we do. Usually most people think, statistics is just numbers. It's much more than it. It's also part of it. Probably the number which come out of it is a very interesting thing in it, because you want to apply it somewhere. But if you think about how to get to the numbers and go from 1 to 3, as you see it in the slides, we must have first an international comparability, so a sort of consensus to have a standard. What is a tourist? What is tourism expenditure? What is a destination? Things like this. And then securing this international comparability. So we have to convince countries, statistical offices, users and producers of these data to do that. And then comes the dissemination and encouraging actually analysis of these data. And we give direct support also, in particular, to developing countries. So as a part of the United Nations system, we want to help countries that have, still underdeveloped statistical systems and who focus on their tourism sector and want to go ahead with that. Maybe the next slide. No. Okay. So here you see a bit what our main contribution was. As I said, within the UN system, we mainly have as interlocutors governments and governmental statistical system, official statistics. So these are the statistical offices in countries. And we provide the concepts, what is tourism, how we see it, how is it internationally agreed. And that is what these two publications show. The beauty of it is, as you see in the upper right depiction of the small book, which calls National Accounts, we have reached a phase where we can measure tourism as it is measured in GDP. So if ever you compare tourism to, say, agriculture, financial services, manufacturing, chemicals, the finance minister or the economics minister cannot just say, oh, these are figures made up. No, they are consistent with national accounts. We know what we are talking about. We know what value added is. We know what the concepts are behind that. Having said that, one of our mantras, philosophies, call it what you want, is if you can measure it, you can manage it and improve it. And that is a bit the underlying cycle of policy making. So measurement is at the base of it. On that you base your analysis, and your policy strategy comes out of that. And then you look at whether you are on track, you implement it, monitor it, you evaluate it, and necessarily, if you're not on track, you adjust either your policy and your formulation. But think about the first step, the measurement. If you don't get that right, you are the satellite which gets burned on Mars. So whatever you do at the beginning, get that step right. And therefore, probably the analysis and the policy strategy is the more sexy thing to do. But if you base it on information which is not correct or which has bias in it, then you are doomed. You're really doomed. So we want to have better, more data. We want to have this for the sector, for any stakeholder in that. And that's where we publish it, make it available for our members, for the countries. And I hope you understand that why I underline so much the measurement issue involved in all of this. But until now, I mainly talked about official statistics, so which is generated out of an official mandate, out of an internationally agreed standard. And that is fine, but the world of data is evolving so quickly, and you see it here. And that was the theme of your conference, eTourism. We see a lot of ICT concepts, new ones, applications to business models, to tourism. And it means actually, if you say ICT, it means data is available. It is, and that is why there's a huge transformation in the sector. That is challenging for us as an international organization, but also for the national statistical offices that remain mainly on traditional statistical systems, which are surveys. So you send out a survey either in paper, well, not that much done today, electronically or via other means, telephone interviews, etc. And this is then done with the usual sampling size, and you make some inferences out of that. Sometimes you even use administrative data. If, for example, you still have border controls, a small island or a country fairly located in a distant place, with border controls, only 1 or 2 entry points, so checking your passport where the people are coming from, that's quite easy. But I think the The most interesting and the most challenging part is the huge and ubiquitous availability of data. And that means also instantaneous data. If you think about that, you can have data on what's happening now, today, in tourism. And many people dreamt of that not too long ago, say 10 to 15 years ago. Nobody would have expected that we have such an explosion of data right everywhere. Was there something? So these are some of the themes you discussed, and that is also where we see actually the challenge for official statistics. The generation of data is everywhere. This just as a slide, which is probably already outdated, the amount of data which is generated in just 60 seconds. You can pick up any of these parts of it, and probably it's wrong. You probably have to double the figures. I don't know how old the slide is, maybe half a year or a year. Probably the amount of data flowing in and out in the system on the internet is really huge. So innovation is a way how we spread and penetrate better solutions, and the use of technology, and that's the purpose, and that's what we want to achieve. The massive availability of data and highly dynamic data, and sometimes also weakly structured data, and that is where it comes in, where the name big data. It's a lot not well structured, very dynamic, changing all the time. This becomes a real challenge for us official statisticians. How do we deal with that kind of data? But we are working on that. So statistical offices in countries are aware that they must make use of this type of data, which is not their traditional way of working, sending out surveys, etc., you name it. So there are working groups, global working groups, where statisticians are together and looking into the use and usefulness of big data for official statistics. And we have already some examples of that. Our host region here, the Basque Country, is actually one of the pilot studies and advanced regions where you used a lot of mobile positioning data, tracking data for tourism. So you know where people are going, how long do they spend time where. The European Statistical Office did a similar exercise. We were involved in that using positioning data, mobile positioning data, to see where do tourists actually move, how long do they stay where. Other examples are the use of credit card or electronic transactions. The country of New Zealand, for example, 2 years ago, completely scrapped their traditional surveys of domestic tourism, asking your population, where are you going, a sort of household survey. How much time do you spend abroad or in the country? Where did you go? Did you stay in a hotel or with friends? Whatever. And they only used electronic transactions and could identify actually the travel behavior and the amount the New Zealanders spend abroad or within the country and regionalize it. And in addition, it was much cheaper than running all the surveys with 10,000 interviews and analyzing that. So big data is something we are looking at from the official side. But of course, we are always a bit behind the latest trends. You, either as academics or as business people, you are actually making the trends. We are trying to follow and track you. That is challenging for us because you're moving so fast. This gives you a bit the main reason why official statisticians are so much interested in it. Yeah, big data or the availability, it's faster and you have more timely statistics. And that is true for developing countries or developed countries. You see the questions we asked for some of the chief statisticians. The main reason is, you get data more quickly, and that is what policymakers want, that is what business people want, and that is where we actually see the most impact of big data and where we want to move into using that or making use of that for our tourism statistics data. So I hope with these examples you have an idea what we are doing, what our mandate is, what we can do, but where we also see the benefits of attending conferences like this and to see what are the latest developments in technology, the ideas you have, you generate, and you're making use of it. And that's it. I thank you very much for your attention. I think, anyway, we have a panel discussion where I'm happy to answer any questions, or should I take now questions, whatever.
Thank you, Oliver. I just have one clarification question, then we're going to go to the panel later. Because of all the big data and smart tourism and all these new things that are developing, have you changed the way you collect statistics, or are you still collecting in a very traditional way? And do you incorporate all this plethora of new data somehow into what you're portraying?
Yeah. The World Tourism Organization itself doesn't send out any surveys or any methods of collecting direct data. So we don't send any survey, or we don't call any tourist, where do you stay, how long do you stay there. So we rely actually on what is done on the national level. So we are in constant communication with the statistical offices of each and every country or region. And whatever the country does, and some countries are, let's say, more innovative than others, whatever they do, we are interested how they do it. We want to know what the methodology is and want to advise and learn from them so that others can learn from the more advanced countries. So what we are doing is we collect data, but that is literally more a collection function. It's not a classical survey research function. So we rely what National Statistical Office can deliver and deliver. Spain is a good example. It has one of the most advanced statistical systems in tourism. So what we recommend in total, we have about 140 series of data, where we say, oh, you start with the international part, you start with the domestic part, you have a part on how the industry is structured, and various data variables, if you want to. And Spain almost can fill all the questionnaire, all the information lines we have. Other countries are really struggling with it. They maybe count the physical flows, but that's it. They don't know, well, what is the economic impact in it? What does it mean for exports and imports of tourism, etc.? So that is where we would like to have a more holistic and global picture of tourism, and where we try to have also, when I mentioned the capacity building exercise, especially for those countries that are in the development phase of their statistical system.